February 9th, 2011, my plane landed on Schiphol Airport at Amsterdam. It was quite snowy and cold outside. So our plane took almost 30 minutes to reach from the landing place to the dockyard. I was there for 4 months for a business analysis project. Time went on, and in 2014 I again landed in Europe, but this time not in Frankfurt, not in Amsterdam, but in Frankfurt. And this time the project was more to do with Agile Business Analysis. So in this talk of the next 45 to 50 minutes, I'm going to take you to these two journeys and also explain the concepts, how it can be applied in the actual world. When we talk about Agile Business Analysis, I just wanted to give you or answer three major questions: why it is important, what it is all about, and how to tackle it. Because in the words of Viktor Frankl, the person who knows the why can get away with any how. And if you don't know Viktor Frankl, he has written one of the most famous books of all time, Men in Search for Meaning. So why Agile Business Analysis is important? Now this why is essentially being driven by the market demands. So a recent study shows that the business analysis and the management analysis or the management consultant jobs will grow at the rate of 14% from 2018 to 2028. And the striking figure is it is the highest growth rate that can happen or that will happen for any other profession. So we need to first understand whether there is a market demand or not. And this data clearly shows that there is a market demand for business analysts. Now, if you look at this entire presentation, there are two pieces of jigsaw puzzle. One is business analyst and the other one is agile. So we will tackle both these puzzles one by one. But let's first try to tackle the first part. Who is a business analyst? Anyone in the chat want to give a try based on your understanding? Who is a business analyst? Okay, so I can already see some responses. If you want to get into the classic definition of business analyst, it is described as an individual who is responsible for discovering, synthesizing, and analyzing the information. So when we talk about discovering the needs and the information, it's through various tools, processes, documentation, talking to stakeholders. Now, over the period of time in recent year, the definition has appended one more important component, and that is with frequent involvement and investigation, which was missing previously, which essentially means earlier there was a phase of business analysis that used to be considered in waterfall, and then the business analyst go off from the team, and that requirement is considered to be final. But now the requirement is evolving. It is something that need to be introspected, that need to be evolved over a period of time by discussing, by understanding, by making sure that we challenge these stakeholders. So when I talk about business analyst, many people usually say that business analyst is all about writing business requirement document or functional requirement document. Let me give you some more indication. What are the various types of jobs you can get into while having the business analysis role? So just to list down few, the first one could be a UI analyst, which deals with the wireframes, which deals with the user interface of the application. A typical example is a business analyst for a web application. Now, a typical business analyst is someone who writes documentation that are related to acquiring the requirements. These can be the functional requirement document, the business requirement document, the market requirement documentation, the use case diagrams, conducting workshops. There can be also one more flavor to it, which is of system analysis. So in one of my previous assignment, I worked as a system analyst in order to understand the system and improve its performance and overall output using various tools like Genius, like Splunk, which is very popular now. And this is not only about the non-technical thing, but it also involves some part of your technical aptitude as well. The next flavor to it is a data modeler. Now, to understand data modeler, there are two major differentiation or two ways in which you can look at this role. One is a typical data scientist role that deals with analytics, that deals with data visualization, that deals with data that is in big amount, in big chunks, and you want to understand the data and get a business insight out of it. And the other is business analysis on the data completeness, on making sure that your system gets the right set of data. It also involves some sense of data mapping as well. And this at times require deep domain knowledge. Just to give you an example, in one of my previous assignment, I also make sure that the data that get into a bank is complete in the sense when it is trying to communicate with another bank. So earlier they used to communicate using empty messages, but later they moved to an MX format, which is an XML format. Way of looking at it, or the other mode of jobs that you can get as a business analyst is of tester. Now, typically, tester seems to be very diminishing role. Nobody wants to do it, but it is one of the most critical role in the entire SDLC life cycle, which essentially means that when you work as a tester or you get into the shoes of a tester, you need to work as a user acceptance testing level, which means the functionality that the development team has built in, before it get into production, you need to understand whether it satisfies business needs or not, in order to ensure that if this feature get into production, it is not breaking any other previous features, and also making sure that it is not introducing new bugs into the system. Essentially, you can take as business analyst, and I also explained what are the typical activities that you can foresee when you are a UI analyst or system analyst, data modeler, tester, and trainer. The other component which I'm talking about is there is a need for agile in recent years, and why that is a need is can be identified using figures. So I was just trying to explain that there is already a huge demand to make this agile maturity huge. So if you look at the last figure, 84% of organizations feel that they have not reached to high level of agility. What does that mean? This means everyone understands agile. Everyone has implemented it in one way or another. Now, what the organizations are, or in the way in which organizations are facing challenges, is making it big, which means there are two challenges: how to make it big and how to get it right. So there is a huge demand for skilled business analysts to make sure that the agile practices are not only implemented in one team in one division and other team in another division, but can you bring those teams as a whole and still do the analysis? Yeah, and this is very, very important in making sure that you run the entire machinery in an agile fashion, and then only the organization can be termed as an agile. Okay. Now, if you look at the industry, always it is driven by two factors. Number one is how much revenue I can generate from a specific product. And number two is how can I reduce the cost? And these are the only two factors that drive businesses. So these are the two factors that drive most of the businesses. I am not talking about non-profit organizations, but this is the driving force for most of the organization. So what does that mean in terms of agile, and why people are adopting agile so fast can be explained with the chart that is being created by Scott in 2009. So this describes that when you implement agile practices, the feedback loop is pretty small. And this means that the cost of identifying defects reduces drastically. So in the PowerPoint, if you see, the green is the one that you can figure out using agile practices or when you are doing agile business analysis, and the red are the ones which you will only identify at later point in time in waterfall practices. So just to give you some examples, now if you look at the requirements or design defect can be identified via active stakeholder participation. Now there is a practice in SAFe, which is Scaled Agile Framework, that we do system demos, which means the various teams consolidate at the end of say 2 or 3 weeks based on the sprint timing and demonstrate to the business or the stakeholder, and there they can already identify that these are the potential defects or the missing requirement which we essentially don't need, or the various practices that agile promotes, like pair programming, like test driven development, like business driven development, as this is essentially not an agile session. I will skip them for now and I will concentrate more on the business analysis. So having said that, who is an agile business analyst? Let me clarify two different things. One, you are not an agile business analyst if you have just done the certification and basic knowledge of Scrum. The founder of Scrum has said one beautiful quote. He said, I can make him learn Scrum in 2 days. I can make someone learn Scrum in 2 days, but it will take a lifetime to understand it. And this is very true when we look at the various agile practices and making agile business analysis practitioner. So it's not just getting through certification or learning few definitions, but making sure that when you get into project, you understand the context. You understand the person sitting in front of you. You understand their needs, their requirements, and at the end, when you get out from that specific project or when you finish the project, there is an outcome that the organization can essentially see and also make sure that it can carry on it in future. So I will take a pause here for a few minutes, and if you have any questions, please feel free to raise it in the chat window, and then Brijesh can put that to me and I can answer those questions. Yeah,
So
go ahead.
he has asked one of the important role of business analysis and documentation of requirement. So
Hmm?
as we are moving from waterfall to agile, we are moving towards less documentation. So
Hmm.
how do you see the role of business analyst in agile world?
So I will just give a brief here and then I will touch upon this point in my later slides as well. Now, Agile never says that you don't do the documentation as it's rightly asked. It's just the right set of documentation that need to be done, which essentially means if you are doing a documentation that people will never refer to, why to do it at all is the question that need to be asked every time. That's one. And the other part is if you essentially see that your role as a business analyst is just to make documentation, and because your documentation part has reduced, there is no possibility of your role to be enhanced, is a wrong notion. So just to give an example further on, as I mentioned, the two journeys at the beginning, the one I took it to Amsterdam and the other to Frankfurt. The first journey was a 4-month assignment in a waterfall manner, and the second was for initially 6 months in an agile project. Now, the waterfall project actually ended for us after 4 months, which essentially means we got all the sign-offs, we got everything sorted out, and we are out of the project. And when we say we are a group of 3 business analysts there. In case of Agile, we started initially with 6 months, but then it extended to 2 years, which essentially means that the closeness with business will enhance your value in the organization automatically, because then business will also ensure that once you understand their mindset, their business, their domain, they want to keep you and give you new projects, new assignments. So there is a famous term in Agile. So that's how it goes. So earlier, what used to happen, the projects use. So earlier, what used to happen, there is a project, and then the team goes to the project. Yeah. Now, what is happening in Agile is there is already well-established Scrum teams, and the projects will come to it. So once you have understood the business, their entire business model, their domain, working there in certain projects, then the various new projects that are coming in will automatically come to you, because then the business will also see that there is a value that you are already generating. Yeah. Now, there is a usual question that is being asked, how the responsibility of a business analyst has changed when I go in waterfall or in agile. And here it goes. You need to give more emphasis on outcome than output. What it means is an outcome is something that you want to produce and give it to the enterprise or to the world. And an output is just the artifacts that enables you to get those outcomes. Example of output is business requirement document, functional requirement document, the testing documents, the use cases, and the outcome is your final product. So as a business analyst, now your emphasis should be more on the outcome rather than the output. The other change that will happen is you work with the product team, or say if you are working in a Scrum, you work in a Scrum team. And unlike previously, I used to work in a BA team where I just interact with business analysts. Now, the disadvantage of that is we just wanted to get through our requirement document as soon as possible in the good shape, and that's pretty much is our mindset or view. Now, when you work in a product team or in a Scrum team, you understand the viewpoint of a developer, you understand the viewpoint of a tester, you understand how the architecture is shaping up, and that's the fundamental difference. So the third point we talk about, instead of making analysis better, make product better. So which essentially means I need not have to think too much about the font size, the color of the headlines, or the various sections I used to create in my BRD documentation so much, but I need to ensure that when the final product comes into the market or goes in production, it's defect free. If you look at my personal experience, my earlier focus is more on how to make those documents look better. Can I create a visual diagram much better so that it give much more impression to wider audience, which has left behind to much simpler analysis, which we can do, say, in Confluence using Jira or other agile tools which are available now in market. The next important thing that has changed is now there is no handoff, which essentially means if you look at my previous projects in Waterfall, our target is get a sign off from business, and that's pretty much about it. We give trainings or a knowledge transfer session to technical team, and we are out of the project as business analysts. So there is a process driven handoff that happens, and at later point in time, say after 3 months, they have trouble understanding, say, what I have written or how I have expressed it, or they have identified certain gap there and no more there, because there is already a handoff that is being given, which is unlike an agile practice, which essentially means if they don't understand, it's my responsibility as a business analyst to explain them. And it also get away with the unnecessary KT sessions that many of you might have given, where many people only only use it, say, 6 months down the line. So for example, in one of my project, once I completed the business analysis part, I've given KT session to the testers, and these testing team need to test only after 8 months. So I'm sure all the KT sessions which I have given, they might have forgotten 80 or 90% of it. And the last part in which the responsibilities are changed is the way you capture requirements, the way you elicitate requirements. Now here, you need to collaborate with stakeholders and business on a day-to-day basis. So rather than having a dedicated 1 week business requirement workshop, we have it in chunks and pieces over a period of time. So for example, 3 hours every week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That was our target in my previous agile project. And that worked really well, because then you get an understanding, even if it is changing rapidly from the outside world, and the business are also well connected with you. Now, when we look at the responsibility from an outside world, let's see how the business analyst roles or responsibilities happens once he get into an agile team. So in terms of roles and responsibility, now once you get into an agile team as a business analyst, you need to challenge the ideas of stakeholders. What does that mean? In a waterfall manner, say for example, our target as a business analyst was clear. Get a sign off from the, the business stakeholder and we are done. But here, if you find a gap in their understanding, then you need to challenge it. You need to tell that this requirement, I think, is not suitable for your business. And that's where you as a business analyst add value to their business as well. And that's a fundamental shift in the way you approach stakeholders. Also, you are not in a hurry to understand the various ideas and thoughts. So you take time and understand perspectives and also the various changing requirements. You make sure that you understand how your system works, which means you should know essentially, okay, this is how the architecture is being driven in my application. You have a talk with the architecture team on a regular basis in order to explain them how the requirements are shaping up and how the architecture will go on at the top. So here the architecture blueprint is one thing which is being driven more broadly at an enterprise level, but the design that happens at a lower level can also be emphasized and looked into when you are guiding through these business requirements. Also, you get closer to the actual team which is building the product. So you sit with them, you explain them what's going on a regular basis. Now, also, as you work in a Scrum team, for example, you support the product owner in making sure you have right set of priorities, you have right set of work for the development team to build the product. Now here also you need to understand one thing. Earlier in a waterfall manner or in a waterfall methodologies, there are enough status meetings. So for example, I used to have status meeting every week with our bosses to explain them where we are in terms of business requirements. In terms of agile recommends there are only two kind of meeting that should happen. One, alignment meeting, and second, workshops. Alignment meetings is to ensure that everyone in the periphery, whether it's your manager, whether it's your own team, whether it's tester, developer, are aware and aligned what is being ongoing. Now, in Scrum, these alignments can be done using, say, sprint review or daily Scrums. And second is the workshop, where the actual work of business analyst happens, which means you elicitate the requirement, you discuss with business. So this means you get away with all those Excel sheets or status meetings which are not necessary. And that's where that fundamental shift of documentation or too much documentation goes off with what is essential. We have talked about why Agile Business Analyst is needed. We have talked about what it is. Now let's talk about how to achieve it. Yeah, and to me there are fundamentally three steps. Okay, so these three steps are to learn, to connect, and to execute. When I say learn, you need to learn the basics of business analysis. You need to learn the basics of whichever domain you are want to work in or already working, whether it's banking sector, healthcare sector, automobile, whether it's education sector. The other is business analysis skills in terms of getting knowledge from various certification. Now, there is one question that is being asked: how different is CBAB or other certification from Agile Analysis certification? Yeah. So, just to give you an idea there, Agile Analysis certification is primarily driven from the fact that you wanted to understand the various processes, the various methods, the various techniques that as a business analyst you want to put together while working in an agile environment. So just to summarize that, it's a 2-hour test with no eligibility, but IBA recommend it would be good if you have 2 to 3 years of experience. Now, often at times people ask me this question: is certification really needed? And to answer that question, for most of the people, yes. For some, might not be, because they are lucky enough to get into the project. The project makes sure that they get the right set of training. The project ensure that they get right set of mentor who explain them what need to be done, how it need to be done, and they build up their career over a period of time. But most of the remaining part, it helps in getting the vocabulary. So when you talk with business or stakeholders or going for an interview, it's important that you speak the vocabulary, you understand what is portfolio Kanban, for example, what is planning session, when you use story mapping. Now all these either you can learn from various blogs that are available on internet or YouTube channels, or you have a concise and well-defined structure in terms of certification that give you an insight and ideas how it need to be built upon. I have is how much it is applicable is a different question, because the applicability part will come over a period of time. So for example, even if the certification might have talked about 20 techniques, you might only be able to apply 1 or 2 in your current project. But then the certification will enable you to identify which is the best for your project or for your requirement. Once you learn and evolve, the second part is to connect. Now, it's really important to connect with other business analysts. It's really important to become a member of your local chapter or community group or meetup or Facebook group in order to get an understanding what is happening on a day-to-day basis. You can join some LinkedIn groups as well. And this give you a connect that will help you in the execution, where if you are looking for a new job, if you want to change the job, starting your career, and that's where this execution part comes in. And this execution also involves that you are, once you get into the project, you try to implement all the theories that you have learned over a period of time. So in this fashion, I think there are 3 steps in which you can achieve this: learn the basic, connect with the right set of community, and then execute. With this, I again take a pause, and then if you have any questions which I have not answered, I think some of the questions that are asked previously I have covered in my slide, but if there are more questions, feel free to ask. Any other questions?
Yeah. So there is a question from Ankit, Abhishek. So what aspects business we need to consider for NFRs?
So just to give you an idea for people, NFR are non-functional requirements. Now, when you consider NFRs, it depends on the operating model that you have. So, for example, when I was working for a banking client, the security aspect was one of the critical NFR. Yeah. For another one, the speed of or the latency time was one of the critical NFR. So all these resiliency, whether availability can be determined, but at the end, you also need to understand what is the core business you are driving into. And when you understand by talking to the business, you need to prioritize. So not everything can be 100%. So not everything can be said that I need an availability of 100%, I need 100% secure system, I need 100% resilient system in my first release. This need to build over a period of time, but then they need to prioritize this.
There is another question from Harshini. What is the difference between the role of a product owner and a business analyst?
Very good question. So a product owner is someone who drives the priorities and requirements. Yeah? And the fundamental difference is product owner might not be into the details of the requirements at the very core, but a business analyst is more in the depth of the requirements. Yeah. The one more difference that you can see is product owner is someone who is an influencer within the organization. So, for example, if you are working as a vendor, yeah, your role might be a business analyst. So you can drive the requirements, you can give more details into it, but then there is a product owner which is, say, within that organization who is more influencer. You can of course influence the product owner, but then he is the front face also while prioritizing and getting the product owner sync ups. Yeah. And there is one more logical career progression that you can see as a business analyst is becoming a product owner, of course. But then it also depends on your interest area, whether you want to get into the details of the requirements or whether you want to get into a very high level and just look at the priorities. Now, there can be teams where product owner can also do business analyst work, where there is not so much detailings required. So I have done that in the past. But if the project is requirement intensive, where lot of logical deduction are needed. So for example, in one of my project, we need to identify the interest rate, and that requires mathematical calculations over a period of time need to be done to understand what kind of rates we should give it to the corporate client in order to have liquidity management. And there, the product owner definitely need a supporting arm in the business analyst.
There is another question actually. So what is the difference between Agile Analysis certification and ISQI CABA certification?
So as I said, the Agile Analysis certification is mostly looking into how you can implement Agile practices. So it talks about Agile principles, it talks about the various Agile practices. It is far more advanced in that fashion. And all the previous certification are more generic in nature, which talks about requirement elicitation, requirement gathering, but they don't connect the Agile space.
Okay. Does a full stack developer can become a business analyst?
Now, so of course, as I mentioned in my previous slide, There are various roles that you can take in, and one of the role which I think of as a full stack developer, you can also look into becoming a system analyst who look into the processes, improvement of the system, and also understand technical part at the core. So you understand the technical part, and then you enhance your business ability to ensure that the various capability of the system enhanced.
So now Amit is a certified SAP Activate and S4 Hana SD functional consultant. So will this IIB AC will complement his Activate certification and help in moving him towards a SAP BA role in future?
Okay, very good question. So to me, there are three competencies that you will need to succeed in a business analysis. The first one is the domain knowledge, and that's where your S4 HANA will help. The second one is the business analysis understanding, and that's where this Agile analysis certification will help. And the third one is communication skills. And to everyone, I always recommend go and look at Toastmasters International. So there is a non-profit organization called Toastmasters International. This is one world biggest public speaking platform that gives you an opportunity to speak and interact with people, and that's where with practice you improve your communications. So to answer your question, S4 HANA will definitely complement your Agile Analysis certification.
Thanks, Abhishek. There is another question from Ruwangi. So what if all requested functionality has been delivered, but the customer refuses to give the sign off?
See, at the end, as I mentioned, there is usually sign offs only at the end. First comes the understanding and then the sign offs. Now, there can be unethical practices. I'm not denying them. Yeah, that even if somebody wants to snatch away something from you, definitely they can do it. But then, in a normal circumstances, this usually doesn't happen. And of course, if you are working with good organization and if somebody wants to have a long run credibility, they will never do that. So it can happen that you understood the requirement incorrectly and you are still understanding it incorrectly, and that's the reason the stakeholder is not giving a sign off. But if you have satisfied the requirement, yeah, I mean, it's more about then sign off and releasing money, which usually happens. Okay, so to summarize what I have just said in the last 50-55 minutes, it's important to perform agile, then just learn about it. To do agile. So if you have learned about, say, Kanban, can you implement in your personal life? If you have learned about Scrum, can you go out and deliver 5-minute talks about it or try to implement in your current project? And that's fundamentally more important. And the key phrase that I want you to take away from here is how you should do your business requirement is initially a mile wide, which essentially you should have, or the business should have, a very, very broad picture, and inch deep, which means only details at a certain level. And as you move forward with one sprint after another, you get an inch wide and a mile deep, yeah? Which essentially means you get into the details over a period of time, but you already have the long-term vision, the long-term goal right from the beginning.